Welcome to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin, and joining me this week is Dr. Will Cole. Doc is a colleague of mine and a functional medicine clinician who has his own private practice, contributes as a writer to tons of different media outlets, and is a huge advocate of the ketogenic diet. This week, we chat about how he uses nutrition in his practice, which lab tests you should definitely look at, and why you shouldn't always jump straight into a ketogenic diet, especially if you have any other health concerns. So this is a good one, packed tons of information, and hope you enjoy it. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and best information about a ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. With that being said, let's get into the show. All right, Doc, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to get you on. You are one of the only people who kind of live in the same world that I do. So trained as a chiropractor, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Went and focused primarily on now currently functional medicine and doing a lot of ketosis and ketogenic diets to help your patients, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been sort of an organic journey of really just finding out what helps people the best and trying to keep myself out of it, keeping my own bias out of it or what I think is the best thing, but just like looking at labs and finding out how to get people well. And I think if you get your ego out of the way, oftentimes you'll dig in for the patient's sake and not for your own, prides.
Right. So as being trained as a chiropractor, we're taught a lot about musculoskeletal problems and issues. How did you make the switch from that and what you learned as a kind of a philosophy in school to doing more functional medicine work?
Okay. Yeah. So as you know, many different DC schools have different sort of bents. And I went to Southern California University of Health Sciences, SUHS, and it's kind of a more, I would say, integrative approach. They have an acupuncture oriental medicine program. They have like a nurse practitioner program. So sort of this sort of mecca of different thoughts within healthcare. So Datis Karazian, I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but he's in the functional medicine world, kind of a big deal. And he went to my school. He was older than I was. And I heard of him kind of talking about this thing called functional medicine. And I kind of never looked back since. I'm like, that's awesome. Like marrying the best of alternative medicine, which is, actually getting somebody healthy. And then the best of Western medicine, which is labs and being evidence-based and monitoring that progress objectively. So I think that's what really appealed to me. And it was really a natural thing. I was always interested in wellness, and I found my home here in functional medicine, I think, just naturally.
And how long have you been out of school for?
Since 2008.
Okay. So you've had some time and had a lot of patient cases under your belt? Oh,
yeah. It's been this crazy thing now where it's like how we're talking right now is how I spend most of my day talking to patients. 80%, around 80% of my patients are done via Skype and FaceTime and that whole world. So yeah, my whole day, we were talking before we started recording, most of my day is devoted to patients. So at this point, that's what I'm immersed in, and it keeps me sharp. It keeps me on top of the latest research and how to apply that in people's lives.
Nice. And so how did you get involved into this path in the first place? Like why chiro? Why that direction? And
my dad. Yeah, my dad was a chiro.
Okay.
So I was always kind of immersed in this stuff as like, this is the way to go about life, is to kind of take care of yourself and use food as medicine. And he had people like Dr. Mercola like come to the clinic and like give talks, and they kind of did things together. So I was around people that were into this stuff, and it wasn't called functional medicine at that time. It was just called getting people healthy and wellness, I guess. But so that's where it was. It kind of started from birth, and I kind of knew that I wanted to help people in some way in the health world. I just didn't know how it would work, what it would look like until now.
Yep. And like you were saying, now you're able to do it in a very different mechanism than maybe 20 years ago, where you can do these telehealth conferences and kind of Skype calls with people and impact people all around the world, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I love it.
How would you describe a functional medicine to somebody who isn't really familiar with it, in your words? Because I asked this. I mean, I'm sure my definition will vary slightly from yours, but every clinician has a little bit different spin on this. Like where would you say you're at with that?
Yeah, so I boil it down to like the main differences that I see in comparing what we do compared to mainstream medicine. Number one, I would say we interpret labs using a thinner reference range. So when you go and a patient goes in and says like, I don't feel well, they go to their PCP or their GP and they'll say, okay, I don't feel well, I'm having these symptoms, and they'll run these basic tests, and the labs like largely come back, if not entirely come back, for most people, normal, quote unquote normal, even though they know instinctively like, what the heck, I don't feel normal. Or they're told you're just depressed, there's an antidepressant, or you just need to lose weight, you're just getting older, or they send you to another specialist with more labs and nothing to show for it. So if those reference ranges are based on a statistical bell curve average of people who go to labs. And people that go to labs aren't the healthiest bunch of people. So there's a lot of people that they're going there and they're comparing their numbers, their biomarkers, their labs to this population, which is not a standardized reference range in most cases. There's a few exceptions, but most are not standardized, and they will vary from lab to lab. So in functional medicine, what we do is take people with health problems out of that reference range, and what's left is this tighter range within that larger reference range of where people that live long, healthy, vibrant lives, that's where they're at. And they're in this sort of thinner bracket of physiological function within that reference range. So that's, I would say, the first thing we do differently is comparing your number, the patient's number, to optimal health, and not the average of people who go to labs. The second thing we do different is we run more comprehensive labs, like whatever's case specific, but microbiome issues, hormonal imbalances, toxicity issues, nutrient deficiencies, whatever is pertinent to the case. So that's what a comprehensive health history kind of informs us from a functional medicine standpoint, of what labs would be the most relevant to the case. And the reason why those are not ran in the standard model of care, patients ask me that. I said, well, if these labs are so amazing, why doesn't my doctor run this? And it's because it's superfluous to their training. They just need to diagnose a disease and match it with a medication. So it's not needed, because the end result's still going to be that medication. So it's just superfluous. But from a functional medicine standpoint, we want to get to the root cause as much as we can to understand what's the actual dysfunction here that's giving rise to the ICD-10 code, that's giving rise to these set of symptoms that the patient's experiencing. And then we realize we're all different. And you can have 20 patients with the same set of symptoms, the same diagnosis code, and what works for one person can flare the next person up. And the next person, you don't notice it making a difference, good or bad. So I try not to have a bias as, this is the way that everybody should do things, because I will be proven wrong with the next patient, because it just won't work the way that I thought it was, because the last patient it worked brilliantly for. So you have to take into account biological variability. Obviously, there's some commonalities between people, right? There's some common bonds, not eating junk food is one of them, right? Drinking water, there's some core stuff. But beyond that, it's how do you personalize this? And I think that that's the bigger question that you have to have when you're talking on a clinical setting, is there's so much variability out there. So that's in a nutshell what functional medicine is.
Right. So that actually doesn't surprise me, you giving an answer of individuality, whereas this is always my big thing that I push on my website, through the companies and everything, is that it's such an individual process. And so when people ask for general recommendations, you're not going to get anywhere. And this goes from healthcare to thriving in health and being optimal. Everyone is so different with their biological makeup and how they respond to things, whether that's current environment, past environment, all these different things. And so the individuality is striking to me. It was why people just ignore it generally. And so it's one of those things that it never works the same for one person as it does for another person, whether that's, an intervention in a medical setting, or if it's just a general nutritional recommendation. Goals differ, life differs, everything differs. So what type do you specialize at all in any type of the cases that you do, or is it kind of general practice? How do you approach it?
The majority of my patients are somewhere in this autoimmune inflammation spectrum, which is a lot of people. It's very all encompassing. So that to me is very general, even though some people probably wouldn't call it that. It is general because it can manifest in different ways, but there's a commonality obviously between all of them. But they're just sort of autoimmune inflammation spectrum. Hashimoto's, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, MS, chronic fatigue syndrome, these sort of inflammatory issues are the majority of my patients. And then within that context, it's really what people recognize or what resonates with them. They'll come in and saying, I have, depression, and the next person will say, I have chronic fatigue, and the next person will say, I have, joint pain. But really, it's this commonality between all of them of this underlying systemic inflammation.
Right. And so what labs do you traditionally run on a patient that comes in with any of these constellation of symptoms?
Yeah. So this is I would say maybe a criticism that people give us in functional medicine is that we overtest, and why are you running all these labs? Like, what's that going to do? And I agree that the fact that you can overdo anything, right? And you have to be, you don't want to overtest, but you don't want to undertest either. So it is a fine line of digging deep and getting people the answers. So the labs that we run, I'd say the most common, and again, it will vary based on the health history and what's pertinent to the case. But if you had to be sort of broad strokes with this, I would say some most common labs would be a full blood panel, and we're just running expanded versions of what people would get in the standard model of care, kind of expanded hormone panel, expanded inflammatory panel, nutrient panel, CBC. We run nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR tests from a lipid standpoint to look at the subfractionation there. So those are some blood tests that we would run. And we, more than just the running of the lab, it's the interpretation of the lab. So we put it on an Excel spreadsheet and kind of are color coding it for the patient. But for us, it's just kind of seeing, okay, what's in the functional range, what's not in the functional range, because we want, those are our baselines to kind of make sure that we're improving those biomarkers when we retest. So we keep track of all that stuff. Beyond the blood test, I'd say the top test would be microbiome testing. So it's some sort of underlying gut dysfunction panel. We're looking for dysbiosis or SIBO or intestinal permeability, leaky gut syndrome, candida overgrowth. That's probably one of the top tests that we run. And then based on the case, we'd kind of branch out from there. So methylation testing, hormonal imbalance, toxicity issues, if those are relevant to the case. And obviously there's a lot more labs than that, but those are the top of the list.
What labs do you use for the gut tests?
We use doctors' data typically. We do a 3-day collection for them, and we do intestinal permeability through Cyrex. We do the cross-reactivity through Cyrex, food reactivities through Cyrex, and all of those things through Cyrex. So it's a blend of stool tests and blood tests for that.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, the doctor's data one is fantastic. That's one that I used to use in practice as well. And then for the hormones, what are you using for that?
Dutch tests. We do the Dutch, the cortisol awakening response, and based on the case, we do like a female cycling panel, or we would just do an expansive cycling panel if they're postmenopausal.
Yeah, I got an email from them the other day, and I was all pumped, but yet kind of disappointed that I wasn't active in practice when they said that they were adding in organic acid tests. It's like, oh, awesome, great. I was like, oh, man.
Now you have to start back
order for myself, test out. So then the intervention process obviously depends on a per patient basis, but a patient comes in, they have an intake, you do a comprehensive history, you do these lab tests that are whatever is pertinent to the case, and then you get them back and say, okay, these things are out of range. Do you then form a hypothesis of what the problem is that's causing these symptoms, and then what does the plan and report of findings look like to you after that when a patient look at, obviously everyone's going to be different, but let's say kind of average day.
Yeah. So what I do is when we get those labs, we make an overview, and we kind of basically get multiple labs' perspective, from their vantage point with their testing, what's going on. And then we kind of put those all in context with each other. And then we say, okay, this is what this lab is, basically a summary of what they're saying. And, as you know, I mean, it's normally not one thing. It's normally like a lot of different things that kind of are interplayed, that are interconnected, and some aren't so directly connected, but they're influencing how they're feeling. It's impacting how they're feeling. So a lot of times people will say, like, after I go over this big list of things that are can be overwhelming, but I always frame it with like, look, these are things you can deal with in most cases. These are things that you can overcome. These are things that we're confident with seeing. Like, don't get afraid. But they want one thing. They want the name. Like, well, what's my diagnosis? And, that's really not my objective at that point, is then labeling it. Right? Like, calling it chronic fatigue syndrome is just really explaining how you're feeling. Calling it, MS or, Parkinson's isn't really telling you anything. Okay, but what, from a physiological standpoint, from a functional medicine perspective, how do we fix these biomarkers? How do we get the inflammation down? How do we get the hormonal balance? How do we get nutrients optimized? That's what I'm concerned, because that's really what will impact how you feel, right, is fixing those things individually. And obviously we know collectively the body's interconnected, and there are some things that fall into place as you get things in order, like the gut, for example. But so I don't know if that answered your question, but it's basically just a big, like a laundry list of things we need to work on in the body.
And so it's kind of funny that you mentioned what the diagnosis is essentially telling you what your symptom is. And even when I was doing more sports medicine and musculoskeletal work, somebody would come in from a sports medicine doctor, an MD, and they would say, oh, I have tendinosis in my elbow. Like, okay, well, like, does that tell us why? Like, you have some tendinopathy or some inflammation in a tendon. It doesn't really tell us why or how it got there. And so having to think back, like, okay, how are you actually using your arm, and what are the activities that could be leading to this problem in the first place? It's the same thing in a functional medicine approach, but just more so systemic issues. Okay, well, you have these lab findings, but like, why is that the case? And so peeling that back, it's the diagnosis a lot of times doesn't even really matter.
Yeah, I know. It really, in a lot of cases, it doesn't. And I think the autoimmune inflammation spectrum that we kind of see a lot is a good example of that, is that they want to be labeled with whatever it is, lupus or whatever it is. But the reality is the people that are diagnosed and the people that are undiagnosed are really in the same boat. They're still left with the same amount of answers. I mean, it's like steroids and immunosuppressants, and like, we can't do anything for you in the standard model of care. So, I mean, believe me, the people that are diagnosed will tell you it's not like, well, the promised land is here because we've been slapped with an ICD-10 code. It's like, we thought it would change things, but actually I'm on these medications that I don't even want to be on anyways. So I get the point, because it's basically the patient wants to be validated. The patient wants to know that this is not just in their head. They want to have answers. But the sad part is even when you're given the diagnosis code, even when you fit the criteria for them to give you the ICD-10, it's really, in those cases, I don't want to be broad sweeping here, but in most cases, people aren't really given much solutions at that point anyways.
Right. And so generally, does the intervention look a lot like diet and nutrition modifications, supplements, medications, lifestyle changes? What are you prescribing to people in that sense?
Yeah, so I think food is obviously primary. You can't, supplement your way out of a poor diet. So we start with food and use food as medicine as much as possible and kind of see what that yields us. And when you're talking about intestinal permeability and gut issues, I mean, anything's fair game as to like what can cause problems for people. People can have reactivities against like the most, seemingly, healthy, innocuous food under the sun. I've seen it flare people up. So again, going back to this personalization of it and just being on the ground with them, proverbially speaking, just kind of tracking these things and food logging and seeing, okay, what works for their body, what doesn't work for their body. So we start with food, tweaking it, modifying it from a micronutrient standpoint, but also a macronutrient standpoint, and seeing how they feel. And then herbal botanical medicine. So we're kind of targeting things from a supplementation standpoint. And my goal, again, if we're fixing these things, if we're getting somebody out of this crisis standpoint and getting people feeling better, 9 times out of 10, they're able to reduce and eliminate the herbal medicines as well, and just use food as medicine as their kind of core stuff. Obviously there's a few random things that they're taking supplement wise, but it's not like we're inundating them with herbal medicines, which again is another probably a criticism the functional medicine people get. And lifestyle changes. So we're stress management and being detailed with it, not just like fluff, like, meditate, but actually guiding them and giving them tools and making them stay consistent with it to build a practice of mindfulness or whatever the case is, like Tai Chi or yoga, whatever the case, and sleep optimization and like detoxification protocols if it's needed. So those are some things based on the case.
So when you're giving someone nutritional advice or intervening in that way in diet, what are the biggest things you're, one, removing, and then two, adding to the just general that you see in your clinic?
Yeah. So we have to clean up their diet. And I think that where my practice is now is that most of my patients eat way better than the standard American. Most of my patients are not eating McDonald's, they're not eating junk food. They are super healthy, meaning they're doing all the healthy right things in the world, but despite their best efforts, they're not where they want to be and they're still struggling. So we're used to difficult cases because you're like, okay, wait, I thought food is supposed to solve everything, but it's within this personalization standpoint and taking it to the next level. What are they missing that is keeping them back from achieving their goals? Because most of them are better than they were, but they're not where they want to be. So it's fine-tuning it, it's tweaking it, and kind of taking out the common things. If they've not taken out gluten, that's kind of a no-brainer for me. If you're dealing with inflammation, like err on the side of caution, you can run gluten sensitivity tests, you can run these things, but ultimately we know it's not serving anybody. And if you have inflammation, let's do everything we can to bring that down. And then if you want to try to bring things back in, let's try to bring it back in. But oftentimes I find is that when we're giving people alternatives and kind of they start to feel better, they don't want to bring these things back in. They'd rather feel better. And then I don't start with ketosis. And I think that my goal from a functional medicine standpoint, and again, this is general, there are exceptions to this, is that we don't start with ketosis. If someone's not in ketosis, I want to start with cleaning their gut up. I want to get them acquainted with nutrient-dense foods. I want to support detoxification pathways, basically get the gut healthy. Because if they're like increasing their fats too much, even if were eating clean, I've seen negative. It's just too much too soon for their system. We know it can increase endotoxemia. Like it's just not, doesn't work for everybody. It works for some people, but not for everybody. So I'd rather kind of lean them into it. Some people are up for the challenge because they're already kind of in ketosis. They're like more advanced, but I lean them into it and personalize it from there. So personalize their macros and if they're going to carb cycle and all the sort of variabilities that we take into consideration.
Right. And I think this echoes a lot of stuff that I always mention too, which is food quality is always paramount before you start talking about food quantity. And ketogenic diet is a food quantity diet. It's on modifying macronutrients, and you don't have to have it be a quality rich diet to have it work in the sense of having it raise your ketone levels. And so I always recommend starting quality first and getting that down, which a lot of times, maybe it doesn't fix gut problems, but a lot of times it will normalize a lot of function. And interesting you say about kind of let's say you have like a intestinal permeability issue. A lot of people don't realize that if you're eating even a little bit of carbohydrate with some saturated fats, this can make lipopolysaccharides, which lead to a massive amount of inflammation. And so I hypothesize, I don't know if this is the case, but I think some of the studies out there demonizing and even having valid research pointing to saturated fat increasing inflammation might be due to this mechanism of having a gut problem and then eating saturated fats and having lipopolysaccharides form and then enter the bloodstream. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's research to show that, especially like liquid fats, like when people are having the butter coffees and things like that, which we know can be a decent enough food, but people with wrecked gut health and then they hear like have this butter coffee. I've seen it raise CRP. I've seen it not work for some people. And I think that you're right. The mechanism is intestinal permeability, high lipopolysaccharides, these gram-negative bacteria can sort of pass through the gut lining into the bloodstream. So you have to kind of, even with this umbrella of wellness and ketogenic and functional medicine, all this stuff, you have to kind of see what's relevant to the case and maybe all things in good time and get somebody to that point where they can handle these foods that are healthy, that we know is healthy for the human body, but they can't just sort of jump in head first because they read it on a blog,
Right. Which is, again, tough for me to always read all the people telling people how to fix diseases and stuff like this and all these cures with the ketogenic diet just by drinking butter coffee and having cream cheese and bacon all day. Like it's ridiculous, obviously. But what are some of the things, as gut health being one of the leading kind of lead dominoes to a lot of different health problems, what somebody would know of? Because a lot of people think, well, if I don't have digestive problems, I don't have a gut problem. And so you want to address that maybe and just talk a little bit about how people could recognize any type of issues that could be stemming from a gut problem?
Hmm. Yeah. So that is a common misconception, I would say, is that people think, oh, I go to the bathroom all right, so it's not a problem for me. But you don't have to necessarily have gut symptoms to have gut problems, meaning that you can be asymptomatic more or less in the gut, but you're having the downstream ripple effect of an unhealthy gut. So you can have intestinal permeability, leaky gut syndrome, you have positive zonulin and occludin antibodies, and the person's fine. I've seen parasitic overgrowths, candida overgrowths not have any acute GI symptoms that are having runaway anxiety, or they're having these random autoimmune inflammation flares. So telltale signs really could be any inflammation manifestation of inflammation.
So pretty much anything.
It's everything, which is another criticism. And I'm talking to you from a clinical standpoint. I normally don't say this, but another criticism that I've heard people say about me and people in functional medicine is that, you think everything has to do with the gut. And I don't. I really don't. I would like to hang my hat on any one thing, nor do I think if the gut's even a component. I don't think it's the entirety of why people feel the way that they do. But when you run labs, you're getting multiple labs perspective going on here. You kind of can't argue with these labs that are really good from a respectable standpoint. That there is things going on in many people's gut. So the way I would phrase this is that if you're going through an inflammation standpoint, it's so common, underlying gut problems are so commonly associated with these issues that at least rule it out. And you don't know if it's an issue for you unless you test for it. And then if you test for it and it's ruled out, then maybe it's not a big factor for you, even though there's no perfect test out there, obviously, we know. But it's very common. So if you're going through an inflammation problem, I at least would rule it out. Most of the time, there is a microbiome or gastrointestinal component to it.
Right. And a lot of people don't even realize that, for instance, if you go to your MD and you have high cholesterol, right? That's typically an inflammation problem. It's not that you did something wrong and you have a statin deficiency and now you need to take statins to fix that. No, it's because of inflammation that the cholesterol is high in the first place. Like many health problems are inflammation, like mediated by inflammation. But like you said before, that can be mood and anxiety and inability to focus, lack of energy, skin issues. You run the gamut on this. It's kind of a like I said, lead domino to all these different health problems. And so when I look at the gut and I see, what is the function of it? It's to basically allow things to come in and out of your body, or more so in. If the integrity of that is not great, why focus on anything else to begin with? And like you said, rule it out. And it doesn't have to be the root cause of everything, but if you know that is super solid and good to go, it's going to make taking care of whatever else way easier, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. I find it lets, for a lot of people, it is a core foundational thing. So if you deal with that, it makes a lot of the downstream stuff a little bit easier to deal with.
Right. So you say you don't start people off on a ketogenic diet. What are the cases where you do bring people into a state of ketosis, and kind of what are the results you're seeing from that?
Again, most of my patients have some sort of autoimmunity. So I would say most of them benefit from times in ketosis. So, and it's not just down to what I think they would benefit from clinically, but it's also where the patient's at mentally and emotionally, and what they're even up for doing. So you have to kind of not only treat the lab and kind of get the labs looking great and getting them feeling better, but it's like, okay, well, what are they even up for? What is their seriousness of a compliance standpoint? And not everybody wants to be tracking macros every day. Not everybody wants to be testing ketones every day. So it depends on how far the patient wants to go. I want to make this realistic and sustainable for them. But look, most of my patients are super, super serious, and they'll do whatever that I tell them to do, as long as they are feeling better and seeing the results for that. So I feel like most of my patients would benefit from times in ketosis. No, not all of my patients do that, but I still think clinically, if you look at the research and just the experience I have in it, is that it would in fact be beneficial for them.
So how does it help people that have autoimmune conditions?
It's going back to the same thing we're talking about as inflammation. We know it's an epigenetic modulator. It's not just a fuel source, and it's really good at driving down inflammatory cascades. So all of my patients, I can't think of an exception to this, are in these pro-inflammatory states. This is just another way to basically hack their biochemistry and drive down inflammation levels. So it's not just in my mind, we know this, they're going off of inflammatory foods, which is one level of it. But then they kind of take it to the next level and say, okay, we're not just going off of inflammatory foods, we're actually shifting our metabolism to nutritional ketosis, which drives down CRP and other inflammatory biomarkers, and just feeling less inflamed, less, swollen or inflamed, and people experience even the brain fog. They're having clearer thinking, and that's all from driving inflammation levels down.
Right. And so I know how you also said times in ketosis, and I think this is an important part too, where a lot of people who come on board and start using this type of eating, they think that they have to do it forever or else. And I don't think they realize that a lot of times that once you start having a little bit of metabolic flexibility, it becomes way easier to switch back and forth and use different fuel sources, and that you don't have to be in ketosis 100% of the time. I don't think that's a realistic goal for any human being. And I don't think that's normal for humans to be in one fuel source forever. So talk about what you mean by times in ketosis.
Yeah. So I think that for most patients, if we're going to go into ketosis and kind of see what that yields in their life, so they can see the fruit of what they're doing, I would give it at least 60 days to kind of see changes and not half-ass it for a couple of weeks and then give up.
Right.
Really kind of go through the trials, go through the difficulty of shifting their metabolism for some people, and get used to this and get their groove, so to speak, in 2 months. And then from there, decide what they want to do, which is on a practical level. Like, how do you feel? Is this worth it for you? Is this sustainable with your life? Whatever. Kind of talk about their reasonings for why they like it or they don't like it. And then come up with something sustainable and practical for them on the ground level. So at that point, we would either moderate their carbs, see how they feel there, obviously testing their ketones through this, and then carb rotations as well. It's kind of doing 5 days ketosis, 2 days off. I don't recommend that for everybody. And on the my podcast with Jimmy Moore, people have given me sort of blowback on this, the fact that, this is why are you telling people to do this? I don't recommend it for people that have blood sugar issues, that are like really sensitive to, inflammatory flares. Some people can't carb cycle and moderate their carbs. They can't. I'm not saying this is for everybody, but this is about personalizing a ketogenic lifestyle too, which is where, again, functional medicine really is, I believe, excels at.
Right. Question I have for you. So we all know that with functional medicine, we tighten up the reference ranges a lot with a lot of different lab values. Have you seen it shift and reference ranges just change entirely for people who are in a ketogenic diet or in a ketogenic state for a long period of time as far as lab values? Yeah,
I do. There's two things that come to mind. It would be blood sugar. So even the functional medicine range, they would be in the hypoglycemic state, right, but they feel fantastic. So that you have to put it in context with what the patient's doing. And that's why getting to know your patient, understanding what they're doing, and looking at food logs, all that stuff's important, because you get a functional medicine doctor that's not well accustomed to ketosis. They'd say, your blood sugar's low, you're having reactive hypoglycemia, you need to snack more in between meals and get your protein up, all these sort of well-intentioned, functional medicine-y things to help somebody with reactive hypoglycemia. They're not reactive hypoglycemic. They feel fantastic, but they're just, their body's in ketosis, and it has been for a while, and they feel great. So context with real life, not just treating a number on a piece of paper. And then thyroid numbers. So having slightly low T3 levels, yep, like subclinical T3 levels. Again, the patient's not fatigued. They feel fantastic. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just like tenths of a point, maybe a point or two lower than what we would technically like in the functional range, but they feel fantastic. But you get somebody in a sugar burning mode, those people feel lousy if they're outside the functional range. Right. So your body's sort of this well-oiled sort of hybrid machine, and not this sort of diesel fuel inefficient car,
Right. And I think that too, when I wrote an article that addressed this a little bit as well, but yeah, T3 might be a little lower, but that doesn't indicate that you have a thyroid problem in general. Like that's not, it's just one marker and all of the different things that could point to a thyroid problem. And so if you isolate that and it's like, okay, this one thing's out of range, therefore you have a thyroid problem, or somebody freaks out and says ketosis is going to ruin your thyroid, I think it's just completely misinformation.
Yeah, I know. It is true. And again, it's like, most of the time, these people feel fantastic. We're in that range. And if they're not, then it's normally just a little tweak here and there. It's something you don't have to throw out everything because of a slightly low T3 level. I mean, this is just about tweaking it. I mean, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use that, old saying, is that you just about personalizing it more and not just being reactionary and saying, like, just get yourself out of ketosis because you're in a hypothyroid state.
Right. So obviously you work with people a lot one-on-one trying to implement a ketogenic diet at this stage. Are there any things that you found that are challenging for people to make the shift from or to, or any myths that it's hard for them to overcome? Maybe that's, fear of fat or this individual, resistance that they're feeling from coming from a different way of eating. Are there any challenges that you've had to overcome here?
Not in the way that we do it. I think that leaning them into this, if they're not familiar with ketosis, they're just like eating, clean foods, they're avoiding junk food. We lean them into it in such a way where we're not being too aggressive. We're not like just shoving them down this sort of path because we know it's like the best way to go about things. And I think it's just about looking at the patient, seeing their learning style. Are they an auditory learner? Are they a visual learner? And kind of speaking their language and meeting them where they're at. And like, they know you have their back at that point. And at that point, you have trust with them and they know that you have their best interest in mind. I honestly don't see that much negativity from people when we go into this world of ketosis, if it's appropriate for them, because we've already built trust and they're already seeing changes and they're like, okay, I want to feel even better. Let's go here.
It's great. And so, you mentioned that it's not ideal for people starting out in a clinical setting to switch to a ketogenic diet and you want to shore up all these other problems in the beginning, but is there any other conditions where even when people clean up their diet 100% or a ketogenic diet wouldn't be a good idea to add on?
You're saying wouldn't be a good idea?
Yeah, would not be
good? Yeah. I'll say there's some criticisms, and I would say I don't agree with those. It would be adrenal fatigue issues and then the thyroid issue, which we just mentioned. I actually see really good results with those people. I mean, majority of thyroid issues are autoimmune in nature, Hashimoto's being the most common, and then we know with HPA axis issues. I see if they're fat adapted, they're actually doing way better. Yep. It's just a matter of personalizing it, again, not just being overgeneral. Maybe you're just doing it wrong. Maybe you're not formulating it right. And then sometimes it's the food choices. So no, I wouldn't rule anybody out based on a condition itself. I would say it's more looking at the context, how the patient's feeling on it, and then making judgment calls there and tweaking it and fine-tuning it at that point. And sometimes it's the food choices and it's not the ketosis itself. So if they're depending too much on dairy, that's one problem that I see. You have to maybe do sort of an autoimmune ketogenic approach for some of these people. And then some people don't do well because of chronic gut problems. They don't do well on tons of saturated fat. So we're doing more of a plant-based ketogenic approach. So it's about personalizing it, not saying, well, it's all ketosis's fault,
Right. And how would you personalize it for somebody who has the removal or problems with gallbladder?
Is leaning them into it. It's starting off slowly. And again, we're not just rushing all this through. We're just kind of waking up their system at large, giving them gallbladder, digestive support. Mm-hmm. And their gut's healthier. Their gastrointestinal system is healthier by the time we're already there. So I don't see any issues with someone missing a gallbladder or has gallbladder issues. I don't see any problems with it because we're leaning it into a way that I feel is safe and methodical, and they're not rushing through this.
Yeah, I think you make a good point in having strong gut health beforehand, as well as doing some maybe ox bile salts or some lipases or things like this along with it, and then weaning people off of that, or even maintaining a small amount if they're going to have a super high fat meal. Is what I've seen has worked really well also.
Yeah.
And then another one that I get a lot of questions about is hormones in women, in women's hormones, and how it's not great for women. And I think the whole thyroid misconception gets brought up here. Do you have any pushback or thoughts about women's health, reproductive health especially, and ketogenic diet?
Yeah, so I have written about this and looked at the studies on this. So women have more of this kisspeptin sort of aspect of the physiology. They're more sensitive to times of ketosis and intermittent fasting. So again, it's just down to I see women that do amazing on intermittent fasting and amazing on ketosis. So it's just a matter of leaning them into it. Maybe we push too hard, maybe kind of lean it back a little bit, moderate the carbs a little bit, look at their food choices or the quality of the foods that they're eating. And if they are intermittent fasting as part of their ketogenic lifestyles, maybe just doing gentler intermittent fasting on this healing journey. And then most of the time, as those people progress and they get better, they can lean into it. They just are moving at a slower pace. So no, I don't see it being an issue for women's health either. It's just a matter of doing it the way that's best for their body.
Right. A lot of times when I see hormonal problems with women on a ketogenic diet, it's that they just made a huge switch to a ketogenic diet. They're extremely stressed. They're under eating and they're doing intermittent fasting and they're working out too much and they're not getting sleep. And it's like, what do you expect from hormone adaptation at this point? Anyways, it's like, it's not the fault of running on ketones. It's like all these other problems that you have that you're not addressing that just add in and add this, additional stress towards your body that it can't recover from.
Exactly. So it's just, again, people get frustrated because they think, oh, I tried it, it didn't work for me. And I just think, well, not so fast. I mean, look how you did it. And I think that's because a lot of our patients are brilliant people, smarter than I am, many of them. But it's just a matter of having someone outside of yourself to say, okay, we see this on like an hourly basis. How do we kind of fine tune this, tweak this, and not just feel so frustrated and give up on everything? Because you probably are on the right track. It's just a matter of fine tuning it.
Right. So you yourself, you are on ketogenic diet most of the time, some of the time?
Most of the time. I eat intuitively. If I want to eat more, carbs one day, I do it. My team was just making fun of me because we were on a conference trip in Boston. I was like, I wanted sweet potato fries. And it's like, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. But it's just like you said, when you have metabolic flexibility, you have that grace-based way of eating and you're not beating yourself up. Some people don't have that wiggle room. And I don't want to mean like, once you do this, you can eat whatever you want. You have metabolic flexibility. There's some people that don't have the wiggle room that I have. And they're a lot of my patients. But myself and what works for my body, I have that ability to move and still I can go long amounts of time without eating and I'm fine. So it's part of my life for sure.
Yeah. So this is one of the questions that I get asked a lot when I'm on podcasts or being interviewed. And people freak out if I'm not 100% in ketosis all the time. I say, like generally, I feel great on a high-fat diet that promotes ketosis, but sometimes I feel great eating carbohydrates, and that's just how I'm going to eat. And so, just like you said, like very intuitive with how I'm approaching nutrition. So, kind of the four big things I look at for health that I like to ask everybody in here is obviously nutrition's kind of paramount, which you just covered. And then movement, stress, and sleep. And so I'd like to just get your opinion on how you approach each of these things in your life, and then a tip for, maybe just one thing that you would have people change if there'd be one thing that you would think of. So let's just think about nutrition. Obviously, like what does a day in your life look like as far as the meals you're having?
Well, I intermittent fast in the morning. I don't have anything except just black coffee. Plain, no butter or coconut oil or anything in it. And then around 12, I eat. So I'm eating a salad with tuna and like avocado mayonnaise and guacamole or avocado in that. And then for dinner, it's typically, again, some sort of fish with vegetables. It's pretty boring. I'm pretty basic, like Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, I'll kind of be a little bit more loose with it, but I still are going to fast typically in the morning, maybe a little bit less, and then eat similar meals. I am like a creature of habit, and like once I get into a groove, I just kind of do it, and I very rarely kind of go off of that. So that's what my very boring life looks like food-wise.
Sounds pretty straightforward. Love it. Jimmy and I were talking earlier and laughing about how people need to have these complex meal plans, and we're like, yeah, just have some fat and vegetables and protein, and that's pretty much
what I need.
Consistent.
Exactly. I'll cut like a half of avocado out, sprinkle salt on it, kind of spoon that out. And like that sort of basic stuff. That's how I typically like to keep it simple.
Try this out as a modification. Put some olive oil or avocado oil in the center of that pit and some chili flakes and that salt.
All right. I'm going to do it.
It's killer.
I'm gonna
And then any one tip that you'd recommend for anybody listening as far as what to change in the nutrition?
I would say finding out what your body loves and what your body hates, and that probably sounds too vague, but I really feel like we should get away from this shame-based way of eating, whether it's the dieting sort of consciousness of society, or it's this sort of militant ketogenic or militant vegan or militant whatever. It's like, what works for your body? Let's kind of focus on that, and then build from there. So I don't know if that helps or not, but
yeah, it's super helpful. Test yourself is what I always say. What about movement? What are you doing for kind of workouts and just keeping your body physically healthy?
So I work out at least 3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week. I'm just focusing. I typically do circuit burst training 4 days a week. So about 30 minutes, just doing different, burpees, strength training for about half an hour. So that's what I do. I just try to sweat 4 times a week.
Nice. Any top tips?
Be consistent with it. So I think a lot of times people do, I'm talking maybe to my patients, is they do it a little bit there, just like they eat, well for a little bit of time and they think, I'm not seeing the benefits of it. You have to be consistent with it, which I know people kind of get, but it's like not the sexy way of it describing it. And they want something quick fix, but you kind of have to just make it part of your life and make it part of your grind. And then you'll yield the benefits of it the more you do it.
Love it. Okay. Stress management. Like you said earlier, I think you like to build systems for your patients. What kind of systems have you built for yourself to make yourself accountable for stress management?
Yeah. So I lean towards more anxiety, and it's something that I have to be on top of it. So mindfulness meditation is something that I do take seriously. So any moment I have in between patients, I'll just close my eyes, and it's breath work. It's either becoming conscious of my breath, or what's referred to as inner body awareness, which sounds a little probably hippie for some people, but it's just being aware of your own aliveness to kind of center yourself in the present moment. It's really based on a lot of tools that I learned through Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. Power of Now, New Earth. I mean, really good practical stuff. Anybody that's listening should read his book, or I like listening to the audiobooks because his voice is very calming. But they're practical stuff you can use in your life. They will bring your blood pressure down, bring inflammation levels down, center you in the present moment. So that's what I do. It's really breath awareness exercises. And I'm spiritual as well. So I pray to God, and I'm a faith-based person. So that's those are 2 things that I do.
Okay. One piece of advice there.
Is I guess the advice would be to read Eckhart Tolle. So I think it's a good practical
Power
tool.
of Now.
Power of Now would be a good start. Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah. I'm the most no bullshit type of guy around, and when I started hearing about meditation, I was like, oh my god, all this stuff is just completely bogus. And then I was like, okay, keep hearing it from all these people that I respect, and I'm going to try it out. I'm going to start doing it. And this is maybe 3 years ago. Game changer. And now if I go one day without it, I notice a huge difference. Yeah. So for me in the morning, it's like brushing my teeth. I just don't walk out the door without doing it.
Yeah. It's an anchor. It's an anchor for your day. And the more that you are, people are on autopilot. And I think one of the biggest things I've got away from reading his works and kind of seeing is that we are not our thoughts and emotions. And that so much people are just caught up in this constant state of, its research shows us that most 90% of our thoughts are repetitive.
Right. And
it's like we need to sort of create this observation of our thoughts and emotions and take them captive and not just be completely caught up in these thoughts and emotions and mistaking them for who we are.
Yeah. One of the things that I've also started doing in the last couple of years that has helped, because I lean more anxious as well, is just trapping those thoughts on paper. Like in the morning when I wake up, if I wake up and my mind's racing, or at night if I can't go to sleep, I just write down whatever I'm thinking, whatever comes to my head, and lock it on paper. And I look at it and I go, okay, now I can stop thinking about that, and then just trap it there, and I can just move on. Super helpful.
Yeah, that is. Externalizing it, I can see that being really beneficial. It's a good idea.
What about sleep for you?
Sleep. I fall asleep really easily. It's not my problem. I fall asleep fine. I go to bed too late sometimes, which is a lot of people's problem. Or watching TV too late. I could say I'm guilty of that, but I sleep fine. It's not a problem for me. A lot of my patients, not so much. It's something we definitely have to clean up, and it's not a luxury. A lot of people think I'm busy. That's just for like the people that don't have anything going on. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity, and you need to make that a priority. So whether it's just cleaning up sleep hygiene is what they call it, but it's just basically creating parameters and stopping electronics. If sleep is your problem, maybe you stop watching screens and flipping through social media a couple hours before bed. They obviously sell this, blocking glasses, or, there's different hacks you can do to improve sleep from that standpoint. But it's not my problem. I sleep fine.
7-8 hours.
Yeah.
Nice. One piece of advice.
If you're not sleeping well, make it a priority. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity. That's my advice for that.
Prioritize it. Nice.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing you everywhere now. I mean, you're doing all the speaking, you're doing guest articles all over the place. Social media is going crazy. What are you working on kind of 2018? Like, what are your big goals kind of for your own health, for your own self?
Yeah. So 2018 is going to be
18.
Crazy, I think. 2018, yeah, it's going to be, did I say 17?
19.
Anyways, 2018, the next year, this coming year, this year is going to be crazy in a good way. I mean, I'm focused primarily seeing patients. That's still what I am doing on a daily grind standpoint. Like the majority of my week is immersed in patient cases. So I'm not going to get distracted from that at this point. It's my focus. But the other days of the week, it's going to be things that complement patient casework. It's going to keep me sharp and on top of it. But we have a book coming out in 2018, probably the summertime. I wanted to talk about it, but the publisher said I can't, so I can't talk about it yet. And we have video classes that we have on the website already, but we're filming new video classes for people to get added content there. And just writing more, just weekly articles, and I love writing. So that's basically what I'm working on.
Love it. And where can people find all this stuff if they're interested?
It's at drwillcole.com. So just my name, drwillcole.com.
Awesome. Social media is?
Dr. Will Cole for all of them. So Dr. Will Cole, Facebook, just type in Dr. Will Cole, you'll find it there. So yeah, a lot going on there. We try to keep people engaged on there and, keep them connected to what we're doing.
Right. Well, maybe when the veil has been lifted about the book, we'll have you on again and we can chat about that and some more. I'm sure we're going to get tons of questions about this stuff. I know when I start ranting about the same type of things, I just get flooded with questions, which is a good thing. It means people are curious, and that there's very few people who have the lens of functional medicine and use a ketogenic diet as a support system for that. And so I can foresee a lot of questions popping from this in a good way.
Awesome.
Otherwise, thanks for being on, and we'll chat soon, Will.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't, I would love a review. Just go over to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and pop in a review so we can get found by more people, get better guests, and have the information that you need. So please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. And if you're new to keto, head on over to perfectketo.com/podcast and enter your email for all our top tips and guides on getting started with the ketogenic diet. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.